Okay, the first shiur we're going to be speaking about, first shiur today, called the first shiur of Kolel, is going to be about the Mem Sa'ah that you already all learned in Seif Aleph, in the Tur and the Beis Yosef, and in the Mechaber. If you didn't finish it yet, you will finish it in the next, tomorrow, whatever it is. I'm going to give a shiur on what's the cheshbon of Mem Sa'ah, how do we get the whole idea of Mem Sa'ah. What I gave you is going to be referenced later in the shiur. You don't have to look at it right now. It's a machzedeks and everything else. So just these are the things that you don't have sfarim with you. So therefore, I gave them to you. Hopefully, one day we'll be able to get some machzedeks for everyone. There is a mishnah in Mikvos Perek Aleph Mishnah Zayin. The Maila Mehem Mikveh Sheyesh Bay Arbaim Sa'ah. It means there's different levels of mikvahs. The third one is mikveh sheyesh bay arbaim sa'ah. Shebot toivlin umadbil. Mikveh, which means mikveh of makeshamim. It's 40 sa'ah, you could be toivl and everything. L'mayla mehem mayim shemei of mu'atim. Higher than that, you have a mayim which has a little bit of water, and you add it to it mayim she'uvim, and that becomes like a mikveh that you could be metayer in it. What is the shiur of a mikveh, of a makeshamim? So we have the Rosh and the Rosh on the page over there. Seems like the midaraisa, the only shiur of a mikveh is a revis. The minimum shiur of mikveh is a revis. Anything more than that, as long as you could cover yourself with the water, you're fine. You have to have a revis. Revis is the minimum shiur for a mikveh of makesham. If you don't have a revis, then you have. If you don't have a revis, it's not a mikveh. And to cover yourself, it's a different din. You just can't toivel yourself halfway. So there's no such thing as a tefillah halfway. So you have to have enough water to toivel whatever you're toiveling in it to become tahor. Then the Rabbanan came and were mevato the din of revis, and it became a boim sa'ah. But midaraisa shiur mikveh is a revis. It means according to the Rosh and the Rosh, before the Chacham were mevatel the din of revis, it applied both to people and to kelim, and only after they were mevatel it, they made the shiur of Mem Sa'ah as a general shiur for any mikveh of makeshamim. The people who hold that this mikveh is a shiur of Mem Sa'ah is only medivrei seifrim. You have a Tosfos in Nazir that he writes. He writes over there, be'adam la'olam ba'ya Mem Sa'ah l'mikveh. Amar Rabbi Mekomo kim revis mayim lo betlu v'yachal hadbil mechatim mayim afilu kol shehu. And says midi katani mikveh Mem Sa'ah al karchach basar de betlu. The ikoydem lachem gam mikveh tar berevis. The Tosfos, the way Tosfos explains it is, he says that what we're talking about in that Gemara in Nazir, when he says Mem Sa'ah, it's talking about basar de betlu, after it was already cancelled. Before it was cancelled, the mikveh is tahor in the revis. And then the Tosfos continues, and you can't say that koydem bittul, it's talking about a mikveh koydem bittul in the Adam. And the Tosfos explains over this. From Tosfos it's mashma that it's midrabbanan. The shiur of Mem Sa'ah is midrabbanan, midaraisa, there's no such a thing as Mem Sa'ah. The Lavush also takes that approach, that he writes it very clearly. He says, "Miu le'omru zeh ela midrabanan." The shiur of Mem Sa'ah is midrabanan. The Kra and the pasuk that we know from the Gemara that kol besarei and the Chachamim were meshayer, that it means amal lama berum gimel amis, which becomes 40 sa'ah, is asmachta be'almahu. It's just a asmachta to the din, and therefore it is not midaraisa. He says, "Ben adam ben kli mischate bepachis me'arbaim sa'ah rak shekulei oile ba bevas achas." So you have right now the Lavush, the Tosfos, the Bach also holds that way. Not in this in the Siman and Siman Kufchaf. When it comes to Tvilas Kelim, he writes, "Nira de divrei hakoyel arbaim sa'ah de nida ein oile midrabanan." The Kras machta ba'almo. He writes the divrei hakoyel it's midrabanan, and he understands that way from the Beis Yosef and the Rambam and the Ravid. And also he quotes the Smag, which also follows that opinion. However, Rashi holds in Psachim, seems like Rashi holds that Arbaim Sa'ah is midaraisa, because he says the Iko Revi is in Psachim Yudzayin with Beis Ramaschal Bekarka Tehorim. He says the Iko Revi He says the Ikar Revis, the Ikar Teras Mikvah Alol Mechotim V'Tzinoiris, the Midaraisa Mekabel Tumok, Yichsiv Mikvah Ma'am Yetor. Revius have a mikveh mid'oraisa. The chik siv arba'im sa'ah be'adam u'dichsivi. What says arba'im sa'ah is about a person. The naf kolon is kol b'sarei, and that comes from es kol b'sarei. Shekol gufa early b'hem. And then he continues at the end of the same Rashi. The bitlu revius the mikveh. Shad bilu kelim epochas ma'arba'im sa'ah. He's talking about. He says otherwise it's talking about the Rabbanim. When they mevatel the revius, it was talking about for kelim. The Rabbanim mevatel for kelim. The Ravid also follows that approach that Mem Sa'ah is mid'oraisa. He also writes in Balei HaNefesh. He says Hoda Aminu Arba'im Sa'ah min HaToreheim Tfilas Adam. He says it Darshinon. You learn it from a pasuk. Kol Besorem Am Shkol Gufa Elu Bohem Kederech Govhoi Dainu Shalosh Ames. But the kelim is enough. El Shebitluach HaChamim. When it comes to kelim, V'al Moshaf LaKelim B'Inan Arba'im Sa'ah. Then Hashba also takes the same approach that Arba'im Sa'ah is Dvar Torah. And he says, "Loi tema de Rabbanon, there's the Rabbanon v'kroi asmachta ba'alma, it's only asmachta, de'raisa mamash hu." And what's the proof that the Rashba brings? An interesting proof. We know a rule that you have something which is de'raisa, safek de'raisa l'chumra. You have something which is the Rabbanon, safek de'Rabbanon l'kol. You have a Mishnah in Mikvos, Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph, Satomei sheyorad litboil, safek toval, safek loy toval, afilu toval, safek yesh ba'arba'im sa'ah, safek ein boy. Or you have two mikvahs. Echad yesh b'arba'im sa'ah v'echad she'en boy toval v'echad meven yedeh beizim toval sfeikoi tomei. That's what the Mishnah says. One of these three is about arba'im sa'ah. So if the Mishnah tells you clearly that arba'im sa'ah sfeikoi tomei, if it has less than arba'im sa'ah, Alma, it says me the sfeikoi tomei shma minot mid'oraisa. The Rashba says obviously it's a proof that the Mishnah holds as de'oraisa. The Lechem V'Simla has another proof. The Lechem V'Simla you have in the beginning, you have in the back of your Sfarim, the Lechem V'Simla, in the beginning of Siman Reish Aleph, the end of Sifkat and Aleph, he also explains, and he asks a big question on the Bach. He says, according to the Bach and the Lavush, they hold that the Gemara in Chagig is a cross, Machta Ba'almahu. He says you have a big problem, because the Gemara starts by saying, Ataris, Shiur Mikveh, Vatmeis, Kadoshim in Asheretz. That you learned that when it says that Yesh Lamashi Smoich in the Gemara over there in Chagige, that Tara is Shiur Mikveh, Vatmeis, Kadoshim in Asheretz, says that anybody will even think that when it comes to Asheretz, the Shiur of Adosh is Mid'Rabbanan. Everybody knows Mid'Oraisa. So obviously you can't split and say that what it says in the Gemara there's Asmachtas, because if it's Asmachtas, and then it's the Rabbanan for Mikveh and the Rabbanan for Adosh, and we know that Adosh is Mid'Oraisa. And the Chibur Tahara, which I printed for you in this booklet, after the Tzemach Tzedek, the third page, he also goes through, explains that it's de'oraisa. He brings a proof that it's from Chagiga. We're going to get to the Chibur Tahara later about something else. Let's just point out to you that he also holds it's de'oraisa. He says, and he even explains why the people who hold it as the Rabbanan now not lav dafke fully means the Rabbanan. So that is, the first thing is you have a machlekes whether arba'im sa'ah in the mikveh is de'oraisa the Rabbanan. We have some Rishonim holding one way, some Rishonim holding the other way, and it's pretty much throughout the later ones. It's mostly we take it that it's a de'oraisa. Sure, arba'im sa'ah for a mikveh is de'oraisa, for mikveh, not for a mayim. Huh? Everybody holds that Kollel is Mem Sameh D'Rabbanan. Huh? By mikvah, arba'im sa'ah for Adam. What's the bitluah? The bitluah is that they converted. They made they canceled the revius for a Kollel. That was their de'oraisa. But for everything else was the Rabbanan. Now, there's a whole different sugya whether arba'im sa'ah is relevant in Mayan or not. I'm not going to go into it now. That's the Tzemach Tzedek that you have over here that I printed for you, the first thing, if you want to go through it, Mishnah Zayin. You don't have to learn all of them. You can skip the two in the middle. It's 2 long pages. The end of the Tzemach Tzedek of this means on the page 346. The end of it, he concludes, this is the Chidush of mikvah, it's not the Shas Chuvas. he brings all the shittas, and he concludes like this. Kevon, the harbe poiskim rabim vatsumim. This is right before Perek Beis. You hold, it's about, 6 or 7 lines from the end of that paragraph. Vesu, Kevon, the harbe poiskim rabim vatsumim, svirelu, the after Adam, ain't tzarich mem saw, talking about in the Mayan. V'adidhu pshita shemayan koshu ein nifsal b'shuvim, which is a separate discussion if a mine is nifsal b'shuvim. Not today, we're machmer and all these things, but saying is midaraisa. V'gam afarash b'varosh v'siyaitim asevim kedivrei ri. Im kol zeh svirul, like divrei ri, that they hold that the mem sa'ah is midaraisa. Im kol zeh svirul hu the ein nifsal b'shuvim. Im kein ein lahachmir b'zeh klal. Afilu b'sharabu olav she'uvim kepasht mishnaseh. These are the Mayan. Now the Tzemach Tzedek, where it's clearly ein lahachmir b'zeh klal. We take the approach that it is a Mayan mem sa'ah is the Rabbanan, and that you don't have the din of mem sa'ah is not mandatory for a Mayan, and therefore you don't tzarich lahachmir b'zeh klal, and definitely not that if a Mayan has more she'uvim than the original Mayan, that they should become puzzled through it. You go through. I'm not going to go through this whole, explain the whole Tzemach Tzedek now. It's a whole separate sugya for itself. Maybe one day we'll go through it. Now we're going to get, this is just the basic introduction. Now we're going to get to the actual discussion of how to get to Memsa. All this you already probably learned. You already knew everything that I told you until now. The Chachamim Masechet Chagiga, which you already all saw, say Taharis. How do you know Taharis? What's the mocker for Taharis? Michtav Ksivan, v'lo nitzilcha elo l'shiur mikveh de lo ksiva. Tanya, it says in the pasuk, the Braisa says from the pasuk, "Berochatz b'mayim." It says that's my mikveh. It's called besoro imayim shekol gufa elabohem. Then the Gemara says, "Kamohem, what's this? Amal amal berum shalosh amis, v'shiaru chachamim me mikveh elabohem so." It says what is mayim shekol gufa elabohem? The pasuk says mayim shekol gufa elabohem. V'kamohem, amal shizit amal amal berum shalosh amis, and chachamim meshayir elabohem so. Where do you put the commas over here? If you say it's the Eraisa, where does it start the Eraisa? Where does it start the Rabbanon? Does the Eraisa end and after Kol Gufa Elabohem? Or does it end after Amal Amal Barum Shalosh Amis? Or does it end after Aboim Sa'on? Where were the Chacham Meshar over here? Means everybody knows that if you can take Amal Amal Barum Shalosh Amis, you can end up with Aboim Sa'on. So what if Chacham didn't have to be Meshar that Amal Amal becomes Aboim Sa'on? Also, Chacham didn't have to be, you want to say there had to be Meshar Shekol Gufa Elabohem? What Shekol Gufa Elabohem means, so you should have had Shiur Chachamim before V'kamahem. So what is their Raisa? What is the Rabbanon? What were they Meshar B'chal over here? What did they teach us? What did they learn from the pasuk? What did they teach us? So the first thing, you have a Tosfos on that same page in Chagiga, in Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, the Maschel Amo. He says, what's the cheshbon of Amo? So the regular person is not Amo. Let's talk about in the days of Tosfos. Today people are bigger, when those wider. Those days people were taller. Today people are wider. He says, what is the Amo? A regular person is not more than a half Amo, max, at least at one of the dimensions. He says in the Adam Machzik Amo ba'oivim malbushim. The thing is, when you calculate the Amo, he's talking about with his clothing. Why do you need it with his clothing? You don't go into the mikveh with your clothing. He doesn't explain. The next Tosfos explains Berum. He says, how do you get to Shalosh Amis? He says, Adam Machzik Dalad Amis Kaima, K'nemuch V'shmait in the Kuch, and the Erech HaKuch Dalad Amis. When you make the berry people, it's Dalad Amis. So how do you get to 3 Amis? He says, Kaima so Adam is Einer L'Gimel Amis Levad Harosh. You have 3 Amis except for the heads. Until the shoulders, it's 3 Amis. And therefore, the height of the mikveh, the height of the water in the mikveh has to be 3 Amis. Nobody goes into the mikveh without bending his head down. So he's 3 Amis, then you put your head down into the mikveh and you're fine. Then you taiva. He puts his head down into the mikveh. That means that what were the Chachamim Mashar over here? The Chachamim went and they, seems from Tosfos, what was the Shiur Chachamim? The Chachamim went, they saw what the average height of a person is with his clothing on, and they put that measurement in. So the Amal Berum Shalosh Amis is what the Chachamim came. The Torah says Kol Gufa Elabohem. They went, they took an average height of the people, Shalosh Amis without the head, and they said this is the width, measure him with his clothing, it becomes an amma al amma, and that's the amount of water that you need in a mikveh. That is what it seems like from Taisus. It means that was a chacham or mashayir. They were mashayir this shiur of amma al amma for a regular person who is, for an odom beinani, an average person. You have a tashbitz. I think it's in the book. Yeah, is there a tashbitz in this book? Chelik Gimel Simon with Gimel. Is that Shuvas? I think it's in there. No, it should be in there. Is there no tashbitz in the list of Shuvas? Huh? This one is Shuvas also. There's the Rosh and the, no? So the Shuvah from the tashbitz, printed out for tomorrow. Chelik Gimel Simon with Gimel. He says, Amal Amal Berum Shalish Ames is Mefurish B'Torah. And he explains, he says, Amal Amal Berum Shalish Ames is Mefurish B'Kosev. That's how he understands it. The way he understands the Gemara. Achas shekavans HaKosev sheyekol gufa il be'en ka'achas ve'odam hu Amal Amal Berum Shalish Ames. And he says, I explain to you in a different shuvah. Ve'chachamim hem shepirishu shezeh Shiur machzik arboim sel. The Chachamim came and said that Amal Amal Berum, the Torah gives you the Amal Amal Berum Shalosh Ames, and they converted it to Arbaim Sel. Ugzeiras HaKosev hu shebamiyah mikveh mayim k'Shiur zeh afilu adam kotan shekol gufa oilei b'palchus mizeh. Even somebody smaller, the Gzeiras HaKosev is that they have to be Arbaim Sel, the Shiur of Amal Amal Berum Shalosh Ames. The Chachamim converted it to Arbaim Sel. And then he adds another point which is important, that the uka, the toiveling board, the pit, so when you go into the mikveh, you can't have the water all the way up to the level of the board, because then you're going to go into the water, all the water is going to come out of it. So you have to have enough water that even when you go into it, and even if some of the water is going to go out, the displacement, the person, or whatever the water he displaces upwards is still going to be inside the mikveh. The water is not going to go anywhere. And then on this paragraph he says about this, there's the Rai saying, and Amal Amma, he writes, I don't think anybody has any doubt about it. But it seems like other people do. We have a Chibur L'Tahara, which I mentioned to you before, which is inside, right after Tzemach Tzedek. And the Chibur L'Tahara, he brings that it's, first he starts, is there Laisa. By the way, the Chibur L'Tahara was a Einikol of the Alter Rebbe. Order Einikol of Alter Rebbe is a Haran Stipler through the Chernobyl branch. And he wrote a sefer on, he wrote a lot of Sfarim, but on Mikvah, he wrote a sefer called Chibur L'Tahara, which has, the first section is about Netilas Yadayim, and the second section is about Mikvahs. I think I bought one. I didn't buy one. I couldn't find the new print. I found the Netzar Chochma. This is what I gave you copies of. So you have, he starts by saying that it's there. He explains the svaras that's min HaTorah, and then he says, but you have people that hold that it's Medrabbanan. You have Rabbi Yoina, Shutu Mekubet says they bring Tamid Rabbi Yoina, that it says it's the Rabbanan, and he's maksha on them. It can't be that it's the Rabbanan. That's the first column, and then he says that the lashon of Tiknu Chachamim says Mashma Takon Chachamim says, to me it seems like it's halach le'Moshe Missinai. So he says, what's this Takonas Chacham? He says the way they looked at it, Tamid Rabbi Yoina looked at it, is Shiur Chachamim is that you don't need up until 3 amas. It means mid'oraisa, you don't need that the water should be Amal Berum Shalosh Amas. What you need is that after you go into the water, it will hit the level of Gimel Amas height. So it could be half the height. If you're big enough, it will raise. It will go up to Gimel to Shalosh Amas. Yeah, and he says, Lachim mid'oraisa, according to them, would have been enough. 20 saw, a person would go in. If it's Amal Amma, the person will displace the water, will go up to the height of 3 amas. That's what would have been mid'oraisa. And the Chachamim came and they said, no, we have to make that the cheshbon of amal berum shalosh amas is not with you inside the water, it's with you outside the water. So that's a takonas chacham. With you outside the water. According to these people that hold that midiraisa you don't need memsa, so what was the takonas chacham in the shitosav? That there was the midiraisa, you had to hit the shiur of amal berum gimel amas. That's midiraisa. So what the chachamim come and say memsa? You would think that you only need 20 saw, and then you go into the pit, the water will go up to Gimel Amas, and you're fine. That's not. The Chachamim came from Masaka, and you need the 40 saw, which is without the person inside. That's the first teretz he gives of Efshar Leimer in that page. Yeah. And then he goes other discussions. We're not going to go into it right now. The next thing is you have in the same booklet you have something called the Gulas Elias. I printed for you the whole. The sections in Tzemach Tzedek in full and the Chibur L'Tara, that page in full, so you could review it later if you want. I'm not going to read and translate it for you now. You have the Gulas Elias. The Gulas Elias was a Talmud of Tzemach Tzedek, and he was a grandson of the Alter Rebbe's brother. So, and he wrote a sefer on Mikvah. It's called Gulas Elias. The sefer goes along the Seder of the Mishnayos. It's on my table. Whoever wants to look at it afterwards. And in there, he all the halachas. He has a lot of interesting chidushim in halachas, but he always writes it as a pirush in the Mishnayos, not as a halacha sefer. But he was a rav, and his this book is a very important book when it comes to Mishnayos, and when it comes to mikvahs, it's quoted by a lot of mechabim, except for the people who copy what he writes without just copy what he says. The rest of the people actually quote him. So in this Perek Zayin Mishnah Aleph, the real complication over here is that the Gulas Elias doesn't have normal organization in the book. So this, what you're going to see here, this Aleph V'shur Arbaim Sa'ah, yeah, is part of the Gulas Elias Perek Aleph, yeah, Mishnah Zayin, Piska Aleph, which is not even here, and this is Ois Aleph. You have to keep track of to be able to find it. This is Perek Aleph, Mishnah Zayin, Piska Aleph, Ois Aleph. So he says like this. He says the shiur of Amal Berum Gimel Amis. There's no way to say that it's deraisa. You have to say that what Shiur Chachamim is this Amal Berum Gimel Amis. The Torah tells you a Torah Amra Maim Shekol Gufay Lebahem. That water, that the whole body goes into it. And Chazal tzimtzimu Shiur. They made the Shiur into they measured it into Amal Berum Shalosh Amis Leipachas V'Leyaisa. That's how they were mishayed. That this is the Shiur, this is the amount of water Shekol Gufay Lebahem that all your body is going to go into it to an average Adam Beinani. Because he brings a raya that any shiurim that Chachamim bring in Gemara are all based on Adam Beinani, and what the Chachamim said was they said the Adam Beinani is Amal Berum Gimel Amis, and then Shiur Mem Sa'ah. So what's the Mem Sa'ah? Once you say Amal Berum Shalosh Amis, you multiply Amal by 3 Amis, you're going to end up with 40 Sa'ah. But the Shiur Chachamim is on the Amal Berum Gimel Amis. But Masha Amru b'Memsa. So then we have a halacha that in Arbaim Sa'ah, if it's missing a kartuv, a very small amount of water from the Memsa, he says if it's even a bit less than Gimel Amal by Gimel Amas, which is 40 Sa'ah, there's no Tvila even midaraisa. Because midaraisa it's Kol Gufay Lebahem. The Chachamim tell you that this is the average amount of Kol Gufay Lebahem. So if you're going to go now and say that less than 40 Sa'ah, you're going to have a mikvah less than 40 Sa'ah, midaraisa is not kosher. Midaraisa is no Tvila. Because the Chachamim just explained to you that this Amal Berum Shalosh Amis is the height the Torah is talking about. You make it less, it's a problem. So then he asks the question. So now you know Amal Berum Shalosh Amis. That's what the Chachamim think. As I said, and Shiur Memsa is an average. You multiply Amal by 3 Amas, you're going to get the Memsa. So why do you need what Chachamim B'chal have to say Memsa? Why do we even have to say the Shiur of Memsa on the Gemara? Why the Gemara continue Shiur Chachamim by Memsa? So he says you have to understand how they were thinking back in those days. He says, for them it was easier to understand the measurement of se'ah, of liquid measurements. You could measure, now that you know how much, you know how to measure Arbaim Sah. You know what Arbaim Sah is. A person would go, would dig a hole, would pour into it Arbaim Sah shuvim, and we'll see if the hole is big enough or not. We'll drain it out, dig a little bit more, and get to the size that he needs. People then, they're not exactly sure how much is an amma. Amma is a measurement of your body. One person has one amma, one person has another amma. It will be complicated for people. Each person will have a different size mikveh. And it would be hard for them, of 2 amas. If you tell them amma berum shalosh amas, you have to have a little bit of math knowledge to be able to convert the amma to a wider mikveh, to a narrower mikveh, to a taller mikveh, a shorter mikveh. What if somebody has 2 amas wide and only has amma height? You have to be able to convert the measurements, to square the measurements differently. That'll be more complicated than just have a shear of liquid, pour it, fill it up, see if it fills up. If it's too much, if you need a bigger hole, you dig a bigger hole. So therefore, in those days, they came and they said, what does it mean, Arbaim Sah? And the Chachamim were the ones, it says now, it says, and also it says, the main chidush of Chacham, Ikrat Shiur Tzimtzum Divrei Chachaminu, Amal Berum Gimel. So the Chachamim came and what they were Meshayr, what they did was the Amal Amma. That was their idea. It didn't come, it's not the Xeris Akos of the Amal Amma, it's their idea. And he says, today's day and age, when people actually know how to measure more often with Amas, with distance, rather than with liquid. So you have in today's day and age, it says today people are shrinking. Each person's in times of the Gemara, Adam Beinani, what today is Adam Beinani, in times of the Gemara was a short person. And if you're going to do Amal Amma today, it's not going to have the Mem Sah, Arbaim Sah of Torah, according to the Amma of Moshe Rabbeinu, because then they has Amma 6 tvachim. So you measure 6 tvachim then, and you're going to measure 6 tvachim today. It's going to be much less. Today we might have done our tvachim. So he says, no, ein b'zeh chashash. Even if there's no Mem Sah shel Torah, he says there's no chashash. Why? He says Torah, because the Torah says Ma'am shekol gufay ela bohem. Chazal said Amal berum shalosh amas. In every generation, it's Amal in the height of shalosh amas, according to the average height of the people in that generation. If there would be, and he says, I guess, ve'ilu shiur de'oraisa mem sa'ah, if the shiur of mid'oraisa would have been 40 sa'ah, it would have been enough it would not have been enough to do our own measurements of amas. So the Chachamim tell you it's Amal berum shalosh amas. It means it's an average, whatever the average height is. But because he says no, the Kabbalah of what was learned from the pasuk is Amal berum shalosh amas. The Chachamim tell you that in their generation, Amal berum shalosh amas came out there by himself. But today it could be less. Yeah, it goes both ways. Always goes both ways. Once you go that way, then it goes the other way also. But practically, Arbaim Sa'ah could fit a big person also. He's going to explain it soon.
Is it also a regular country?
Huh?
Time or country? What? Different countries have
different kinds of different people, different heights for sure.
It's not the human kind.
But he says, well, about going, if you're bigger, not shorter, you don't have that problem, because he says. That's to say the same question. It says it says that you have by a mayon, you need to be, they have to be metal b'kolshu. You have to have your whole body covering. So what happens? Someone who's heavy and fat and tall, body shamin v'gam godel b'kayim, all miles. He's healthy. He's heavyweight and he's also tall. For him, amal berum shalosh amas is not going to be enough, because he's taller than the shalosh amas. He's wider than the bird. So how is he going to go in there? And what's the shear going to be? So he says according to that, if you're going to say it's kosher, as I was asked yesterday, then the mayan is going to be more chomer than the mikveh. Because by a mikveh you say memsa. If you're going to go that memsa is the shiur deraisa, and that's what the chachavim taught us. Memsa is that's the only shiur that we have. And by a mayan it's kosher, and you have to mechase guf. It comes out you have a big chiddush now that a mayan is more machmir than a mikveh. A mikveh it's enough 40 sa. By a mayan that you need kosher, that you need to have kol guf el b'hem. If a person is bigger, he's going to have a bigger. He's going to need more than 40 sa.
That means that if he's not covered in 40 in mikvah, then it's okay?
What?
It's not kol sorry. No,
We'll get to it in a second. So then he says, no, he says there's nothing to worry about it. He says because even someone who's heavy doesn't need that much more water. All you need to do is make the hole of the mikvah bigger. The amount of water, make it deeper, make it a little bit wider. Then the amount of water will be 40 sa. When he'll go in, the water will rise, will cover his head. It's not going to be a problem. All he does is the amount of water will surround him. He's bigger, so he's going to push the water higher and to the sides a little bit more. But it'll still end up going above his head. That shear of 40 of amal amal berum gimel ames, every person is going to go into there, regardless of what his size is. If he's small, and he's only like a quarter of the size of the mikveh in weight and in dimension, so he's going to make the mikveh taller by a quarter. If he's 3/4 the size of the mikveh,
You can't go too big because then it won't cover him.
right? No, it has to be that it goes above his head.
Right.
You can't make it flat. But you have to make it. You make it taller or a little bit wider so he could fit in there. And he goes in, and the water will go up higher. He'll displace. If he's so big, he'll displace a lot more water. He'll displace a lot more water in a narrow place. He'll go up a lot higher. So all you have to do is make the mikveh deeper. So what was the chachamim? So what was the chachamim mashar? So he explains. So what's the amal berum gimel ames? They said that this area that if a person would go into it, would fill up with water. I think I mentioned it before. The person would go into it, would fill up with water. That's amal berum shalosh ames, to be able to. What's the height level? You have an average person at shalosh ames. His height, that's how you take him out of the picture, you measure that line, and then you fill that up with water. So it's not how much water is there with him inside, how much water is there without him inside. And that's where you need the cheshbon that your Kolel should be fully water. The shetach kol guf nechshav kilu mayim. When you measure it, you measure as if his whole body is not there now. And that's how they made the cheshbon. They took the shear, they imagined the person is going to go in there. If he wouldn't, how much water do you have to cover, and you need to cover him when he tovels? And then you take that amount, you imagine that he's not there, you mark a line, and that's how you know where the mikveh. That's what the chachamim did. By a make shaman. And that's how they got to the amal berum shalosh ames. So now he says the amal. Now he says that in Ois Beis of this same Gulas Ilyos, which is on the next page. Now he goes and explains what the shiur of amal berum gimel ames. He says that the body of the person is shalosh ames with his head. He explains that's how he understands it. When you make the cheshbon, it's shalosh ames with the head, not without the head, with the head. And when the person spreads his hands up, he pushes his hands up, that's going to be a little bit taller. But his shiur of gimel ames is a person should be, they took a person, average height of an average person, and that's what they measured, the height of a person with his head is shalosh ames. So now you have Taisu says that it's without his head. And the Gulas Ilyos says it's with his head. So, which way you go? The Gulas Ilyos himself knows that Taisu says it. So the Gulas Ilyos, you can jump 2 pages, and the Ois Zayin, he says that the Be'emes, the Taisus are also right. We do 2 different types of calculations. He says have the Bala Taisus, everybody knows how to do HaKodesh. And they were holy people. So for us to come and say that we hold that it's with the head. Taisus says it's without the head. How is that going to work together? So he says that the way the Taisus took the approach, Taisus went and said this, when it comes to in Kalim, in Masechta Kolel and Mishnayos, they calculate the amma as 5 tvachim, not 6 tvachim. So Tosfos says, talking about tahara, you have also over here the amma is 5 tvachim. So average person's height, without his shoulders, without his head, according to Tosfos, will be 3 amas, which is 5 and 5 and 5 is 15 tvachim. His head would be 3 more tvachim, becomes 18 tvachim. That's the height of a person. And the Gulas Ilya says the height of a person with says is 3 tvachim, because the Gulas Ilya calculates the way we calculate tvachim, which is 6 tvachim. The way we calculate amas, which is 6 tvachim. 6 times 3 is 18, so you end up with the same number, anyways. But that's how he says there's no stira between what the Gulas Ilya says and what the Tosfos says. In what I gave you, I'm not going to go through it. In what I gave you, there is the first seif of Avraham Chaim Noah, the Ktesa Shulchan. He wrote a sefer called Shiur Mikveh, and I gave you a copy of the first staple, the first few pages. It's really the footnotes, his long footnotes. He explains, he goes through the whole thing at length. If you want to spend time on it, you're more than welcome to do it. You don't have to. For a much shorter summary of this topic is in Taras Mayim, which you all have, Siman Daled. It's about 3.5 pages in Taras Mayim. You could read through it. Taras Mayim is quite an easy book, especially after you learn a topic. You open a Taras Mayim, you go through the topic that he references, and you recognize everything that he spoke about. And that sefer was written by El Solobavitch Rav, Nissen Telushkin, a Rav in America, and he wrote this book on mikvahs. This is all the sugya, the yesodis of the sugya of Arba'im Sa'ah. Now, how does that convert practically? You have a bunch of numbers. Now, what do we do with these numbers? As an introduction, when it comes to mikvahs, all Americans have to start acting like Europeans. That's the first introduction. That means Americans are used to measuring things with inches, miles, gallons, and none of the measurements would match. You can't multiply them because one is 12, one is 16. From weight to length to liquid is totally different. Pounds to gallons to inches just doesn't. It's hard to calculate one to another. The European model of doing it, I grew up in South America, I also know it, is with centimeters. Centimeters is very easy. And you have 1 milliliter is the same as it would fit into the same place as 1 square millimeter, and it would weigh that amount in milligrams, 1 milligram. So, you know, the weight, the liquid, and the distance all matches up into one another. And it's multiplied by 10. So 1 meter is 1,000 milliliters, 1,000 millimeters, which is 100 centimeters. It all works very easily. And it makes it much easier to make a cheshbon. So you have, very simple, I said you have a millimeter, 10 of those is a centimeter, and 100 centimeters is 1 meter. How does it apply to a mikveh? You take 10 centimeters, take a simple calculation, 10 centimeters width, by 10 centimeters length, by 10 centimeters height, so it's 10 by 10 by 10, will become 1 liter, and will weigh 1 kilo. So you know how much, based on your space, you know how much liters you have, and how much weight it's going to take also. Because the water also weighs. If you're going to build a mikveh on the 5th floor, you have to know it's not going to take the building down with it, based on how much water you put into it. So it's very easy. What you do is you take the centimeters, you measure them, you measure the height of your boyed, you measure the width of your boyed, you measure the length of your boyed, and you multiply them one by the next one by the next one. So if you have a boyed that's 1 meter long, means it's 100 centimeters long, by 100 centimeters wide, by 200 centimeters total. So you're going to multiply 100 by 100 by 200. And you're going to end up with 2,000 liters. So you know this is how much your bird has, and it weighs 2 tons. 2,000 kilos is 2 tons. And if you do 100 by 100 by 100 is 1,000 liters, which is 1 ton. It's very simple to make the cheshbon. Once you know what the shiur mikveh is, you could also know if your bird is the right size or it's not. Maybe it's too big, maybe it's too small. You'll find out. When you measure it, you know what you're doing. So now, how do we get to the cheshbon? Now that you understand this measurement, or hopefully you understood what I just told you, because you're going to need to, and this is something which in Seder you're allowed to use your calculators. You can take out your cell phones for this, even though I said you're not supposed to take out your cell phones. You could use it for this. The Beis Yosef says that the amos that we calculate are amos shechtos. That means there are 24 and a half. You add a half etzbah to each amma. So it becomes 24 and a half etzbahs. And then he says, you calculate, it becomes 44,118 fingers, etzbahs and a half. How do you get to this number? So it's a very simple calculation, because what I just explained to you now about multiplying height and multiplying length by width by height, you're going to get to that number. You take 24 and a half etzbahs, which is 1 amma, and you multiply it by 24 and a half. Then you take that number and you have to multiply it by 3 times 24 and a half. So that's 73 and a half. 24 and a half times 3, 73 and a half. You're going to multiply 24 and a half by 24 and a half by 73 and a half. And you're going to end up with this number, 44,118 and 0.375, which is right under a half a etzbah. And that is what the Shach says, that it's a half a etzbah minus a half, or minus an eighth. That's 0.375. That's how you're going to get to that number. So that's the difference. The Beis Yosef didn't want to confuse you with that eighth minus, so he left it at a half. But when you're going to take this calculation, you try it out yourself, you're going to see it's 24 and a half by 24 and a half by 73 and a half. Then you get to this 44,000 etzbahs. We're going to get to what shiurim are. Before we get to the shiurim, how do you measure? Now you want to measure a mikveh. You want to know if the mikveh has a shiur. Before we get to what the shiur is, let's finish with how to measure the mikveh. You take a measuring tape, you measure how many centimeters is going up, how many centimeters is going to the length, how many centimeters is going to the width, and you multiply it. Problem is, this only works if the walls are straight and the floor is straight. If not, your whole calculation is going to be skewed, because you're going to measure if the floor of the mikveh is like this, you're going to measure the height on this side, and you're going to calculate based on this side. This side is a shorter height, so you're losing. So how do you calculate it? So you do is you take a level. Hopefully you know what a level is. The level, you see the bubbles in the middle. You put a measuring laser on top of it, and you make sure that it's straight. Then you measure one wall. Then you measure the other wall. Now all the extra, the twists that you have in the places are going to be, you don't count those in. You measure the perfect square that's inside your mikveh. You measure that, and that becomes your shiur. You multiply, like I said, you multiply the centimeters, and you know how much liters you have inside. Right? Then you have another, if you don't want to go with these ways, you have a more balabatish solution, which will take a little bit more time, but that's if you don't want to do the math. And that is that the Taras Mayim brings it in the name of the Chidah. The Chidah, when he was a young Rav, they came with it. It's in Chaim Shal, Siman Ayin Daled Ois Yutes. It's Taras Mayim in Siman Hay brings it. He says that there was a there was a mikveh which was emptied out before refilling, and people were complaining that people were being ma'arid, maybe the mikveh is not kosher, and the Chidah came up with this idea. He says he made a certain vessel that was square 10 by 10 etzbahs. That's the size that he was going to use, and you fill it up 44 times. And then you get to the 44, the amount of its voice, and it's a square, so it's a square, so that, and then you fill it up 44 times and more, and then they poured it into the mikveh. They filled up the mikveh with that measuring cup, and then they saw if you poured into it the 44,118 its buzz, and the mikveh is still not all the way to the top. The mikveh was kosher before it was empty. That's what he did. And the Chachamim, he says, "V'yitav hadavar be'enei harabanim v'naseh kruz levat la'irur b'askamas harabanim." The Rabbanim are very happy that he came up with this idea. Use a measuring cup and make sure that the mikveh is kosher. You measured and they drained it and they said it was kosher. So this is how you measure mikveh. What shiurim do we use? I said, what shiurim do we use? Each one of you has a tikkunei mikvahs, which you have in front of you. We're going to open it up because we're going to go through it now. Get your tikkunei mikvahs. Everybody get your tikkunei mikvahs, and when everybody has it, we will go through it.
Still didn't say how the centimeters equals x plus, right?
I know, I didn't. Page Kuf Chav Ches, it's Perek Yud. Here you have there's 4 shiurim. It's a separate topic. We're not going to go in details now, but the Alter Rebbe has shiurim that were the measurements koydem chazara, after chazara when the measurements were bigger, after chazara when he changed the measurements became smaller. In tikkunei hamikveh, you're going to go through it. It's over here, tikkunei hamikveh. That's you have over here. You have what each etzba is according to the koydem chazara. Is each etzba is between 2.5. It's around 2.5 to 2.6 centimeters. That's the first 2 shiurim. It's different ways of exactly calculating based on taking the Russian measurements and converting them to centimeters. There's 4 ways. There's 5 ways in Alter Rebbe. The first 5 boxes are all in Alter Rebbe. 2 of them koydem chazara, 3 of them after chazara. So he gives you all the before chazara it's about 2.5 till 2.9. After chazara is between 2.16 to 2.22, and Reb Chaim Noah takes even a little bit smaller. After chazara, he says that it's 2 centimeters. The way we paskin is like Reb Chaim Noah, that a etzba is 2 centimeters, and you're going to take the etzbas and you're going to multiply it. Take the same cheshbon you're going to do. You take a little bit more work on your calculator, but it's still going to end up at the same place. You have to multiply 24.5, that's buzz, for one dimension by 2. Then you get one wall, and then 24.5 for the other dimension, and then 73.5, 3 times 24.5 for the third dimension. You multiply each one by 2. And then you're going to get how much centimeters this amma by amma is, and then you multiply those centimeters one to another, you're going to get to how many liters it is. You could do this calculation yourself also afterwards if you want. I can explain to you afterwards how to do these calculations. So he explains over here. It's an important thing to go through. I don't want to go through it right now. To go through the topic of koydem chazara and achar chazara of the Alter Rebbe. I'm just pointing out to you it's in this sefer. It's pretty easily written. You can go through it, and then you have a shiur of tzemach tzedek, which is a little bit tzemach tzedek and the gulas ilyos, which is very similar to the Alter Rebbe's shiur after chazara. And then you have the shiur of the Rebbe Rashab L'Maisa, which is what I'm going to focus on now. That's on page Kuf Lamed Daled. Huh? What? Which page are you looking at? You always add more than what the numbers are. Mikveh Medina is if you're going to multiply the exact exposures, that's the number you're going to get. He says the Alter Rebbe, if you're going to go further in the same in page Kuf Chavtes, you see Tikkunya Mikveh of the Alter Rebbe. He says he was moisif le'erech eshtus. Yeah, another 6. So you take all these mikvahs lemaisa and you add to each one a 6. You're going to end up between the mikvah medina and the mikvah lemaisa. You add a 6 to all the shiurim. That's in Ois Aleph and page Kuf Chavtes. Yeah, if you have to build a mikvah in a place where you don't have that amount of space, you're going to build it according to the Chaim Nar, the smallest shear. You're not going to build. You yourself should not be building such a mikvah. The thing is, if you're in a situation, in a place where there's no other way around it, then you have to know the smallest shear that we hold of. The smallest shear we hold of is the Chaim Nar's shear of 2 centimeters for an etzbah, and that's the shear you're going to do.
And the mikvah medina.
That's the mikvah medina. No, the Chatchila you don't. The Chatchila you go beyond all the shittas. That's a mefresh. It's a machzedek. The Chatchila you yotze all the shittas that you're able to. All the chumras, all the shittas. That's the Chatchila. But you're in a situation where you're in a place and there's not you on shluchas, but you visit a place and there is a community which needs a mikvah. You're only going to be there for one day and have to build something, and the amount of space that they have over there is a small space. So you'll build the smallest mikvah that you can build in the shortest amount of time. With that hole, you'll dig whatever hole you have to dig, and that's going to be the size. You take the smallest size that you need to do. Or if it's in a place where there's only a small, you can't build such a big mikveh. There's nothing you can do about it. It's somebody's house. That's the only place you go. Some places you can't dig so deep. You dig too deep, you're going to end up in the ocean. Some islands. You have to know each place is different. So you have to know what the shear is. Lamaisa, what do? We follow the Rebbe Rashav's shear. That's on page Kufla. That's what you want to focus on now. The measurements of the Rebbe Rashav's mikveh we know from Rabbi Yankel Landau's Reshime on what the Rebbe Rashav's mikveh was. And over there he writes, Esmidas ha'amol mikveh ha'yechoyshev chakadmun of gam ziyah. The Rebbe Rashav calculated the midas abo Osor Viershaks, which is a Russian measurement. Shehem oilim b'midas hameter l'schum shel 62.3 centimeters. Shiur mikveh lefi zehu 726 liter mayim bekirov. The way Rabbi Yankel Landau says, it's 14 viershkes, which is about each one, which is about 62.3 centimeters. That is the Amma that the Rebbe Rashab used for it. Yeah, and the way this calculation goes, you're going to look at it. It's quite similar to the bigger shear of the Alter Rebbe on page Kuf Chav Ches Koydem Chazara. In Mikveh Medina, the second one on page Kuf Chav Ches, Mikveh Medina, the second one is 722.97 liters. Which means you're off by about 3 liters. That's it. Between one measurement and the other measurement. So it means the shear that the Rebbe Rashab took seems like it's the shear of the Alter Rebbe Koydem Chazare Lahachmir, and then that's one way of doing it. And if you add, it means you add a little bit to it, the shtus, you end up with that amount of 723 liters.
Can I ask you, how do you get again from the centimeter to the liter? If you take the length and breadth times the height,
yeah,
you come to centimeter squared. How do you get from that to the liter?
You multiply centimeters length by centimeters width by centimeters height, and divide it by 1,000. Or take off the last three digits after the comma, yeah. And then you'll know how many liters you have there. If you're going to multiply 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters, you're going to end up with 1,000,000. You take off the three last digits before the dot, before the decimal, you end up with 1,000. So you divide it by 1,000 also. Same way, you get the same number. So the shear of the Rebbe Rashab is about 726 liters for a boim saw. The Rebbe Rashab added another thing. That the bottom boil should have a shiur kafel. You double the bottom boil. In case, because there was no filters in the Rebbe Rashab's days, and they had to empty out the boil or whatever. They didn't empty out the bottom boil every day to clean it. So people go in there and they weren't totally clean. So earth and other things would go, it would sink to the bottom boil. And with time, the bottom boil would have a layer of earth and other dirt on the bottom, and the shear of the bottom boil would be less. Huh? Today we don't change. We go. So the Rebbe Rashab said to do it the shiur kafel. That's what we do, and we're going to explain soon. This is the way Rabbi Yankel Lando explains. The reason was in case it's going to be dirt, it's going to be less. So we wanted to do it. We wanted to do it like that. So there should always be one shiur for sure over there. What's interesting is, in the same tashbetz that I mentioned to you before, Chelik Gimel, Siman Lamed Gimel, when he mentions the shiurim of mikveh, he says tashbetz was many years before the Rebbe Rashab. And many years. He says, when he talks about shiurim of mikveh, Kol zeh imu chayva, sheyeh mikveh mitzumtzum amal amal berum shalish amas. He says the measurements I'm telling you about amal amal is only if you have to make it so tight that you have no other way around it. If you're going to make it bigger, somehow it's going to become puzzle. But tefillah saying only one person going to the mikveh at a time, you have to make a small mikveh. If you're in a situation where you can make a bigger mikveh, mishu bal nefesh yarbe b'shiurim. Lots of they call suffix. And he writes, "V'chein the tashbetz, v'chein noegin b'chol ha'mekoymes la'asoyse yoser godel ma'shiur kiflayim v'kifle kiflayim." So he already says you make the shear double, please double than what it is. So I don't know what the reason of that, but Rashab is, but I can tell you that there is other sources many years before which already write that is the custom of Baal Nefesh to make the shear double. The Rashab made the bottom boil as a double the shear, and that's how when we build mikvahs today, we make the bottom boil double the shear, which is about 726 times 2 is about 1450 liters. Of what?
If you have a side boil, you do the same thing.
There's no takon of the Rebbe Rashab on how much water to put in the side boil. You have to have it by yourself. You want to make a lot because it changes much more often than the bottom boil. According to the logic of this, you would make it more, yeah, for sure. More than double.
Why more than double?
Because it changes more often than the bottom boil. The water will change every time you connect. Today, we're saying is, you're talking about today or then? Then that would make sense if you're able to make a big boil. Today, the reason we make the bottom boil double, I don't know the reason. The Rebbe Rashab says to do it.
Also the tashbetz.
Tashbetz doesn't say what the reason is. It's Baal Nefesh should make it. Yareh b'shurim, lots of they call suffix. You have no sfekas of anything. What specific sfekas? You could always come up with a suffix. Maybe the shear is not big enough. Maybe some water removed. Maybe some water changed. You don't know. Maybe it got dirty. There's no way of knowing. Now, practically speaking, if you're going to make a mikveh, which is exactly 1450 liters, you're going to take like I told you convert it. 1,000 liters is 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters. If you want to make it 1450, you're going to add another 45 centimeters on the height, and it's going to become that measurement. And so now you're going to take that mikveh 1450 exactly. You're going to build such a boil. If you're going to have a leak before the boil is ready, and you have to retile you have to put concrete where the leak is, or put sealant, the shear of the bayr tachton becomes smaller. And now you're less than the double shear. So when you build it make it for 1,500 liters. Then you cover, you have enough leeway in case something goes wrong. You have a few liters of leeway to move around. You're not going to end up in trouble. You have an extra 50 liters to play with. If you have to add another layer of waterproofing, if you have to put more concrete in a certain place, if the concrete rose a little bit when it was poured, it wasn't properly poured, so there's a bump in the middle. You have enough space for mistakes. So that's how we measure the Arbaim Sa'al Ma'isa. Now, in the last page of what I gave you, of this booklet, there is from Shiur Mikveh. It starts in, it's 3 pages total. It starts page Kuf Mem Vav, Sikum HaShittais. Put the next one. Page Kuf Mem Vav, Sikum HaShittais. If you want to go through, you have 36 shittais. And what's considered a etzba, and a good, the etzba. And if you want to know the gap between one and the other one, obviously if you want to do the multiplication, the smallest, the first shear that he mentions in Agudo is 18.5 millimeters, which is 1.85 centimeters. You have millimeters, you have to divide by 10. So, and if an etzba is 18.5 millimeters, which is 1.85 centimeters, and you do the calculation of multiply that by 24 and a half, because that's, you take that etzba, you multiply 24 and a half for the width, and 24 and a half for the length, and 73 and a half for the height. The total amount of liters you're going to have in this mikveh is 279. 279.34 liters, according to the smallest shear over here. And you go to the biggest shear, and you do the same calculation that I just told you, that an agudo is 29.6325 millimeters, which means 2.96 centimeters. And you're going to do the same multiplication. You're going to add to the shear of Arbaim Sa'al is 1,244 liters. So the gap, huh? What? Which one are you looking at? Yes, 387. Yeah. Oh, that's the commas. The numbers got switched. It's supposed to be 331, 78. It's 331.78. Because they put a comma instead of a dot, so the number got flipped over in the book. You might as well correct it. It's supposed to be 331.78. Yeah, it's not 78 liters. No. So now, if you want, this is pretty much what I want to explain to you in the practical aspect of it. Yes, there's a lot more that could be talked about in each sugya, but for now, this is pretty much all that I wanted to explain for today. That's the yesodi of Mem Sa'al Medrabbanan and Medaraisa. What was Shiur Chachamim? Specifically, whether Shiur Chachamim the Amal Amor, Shiur Chachamim the Mem Sa'al, and obviously there's differences which you're not going to go into. You can always find nafkaminas if you hold what the Shiur is. We saw one of them. If you say that the Shiur of Chachamim, that the Chachamim were the ones who measured Amal Amal, Berum Shalish Amis, or the Chachamim measured 40 Sa'ah, then the difference would be if a person is shorter or a person is taller, do you have to adjust the measurements accordingly? If the world changed, what the Adam Beinani is in today's day and age. It's interesting in the Shach that you have, one of the Shachs that you either learned today or you're going to be learning, hopefully today. There is, over there when he mentions what an Amma is, he tells you it's 2 shoes. 2 shoes of Adam Beinani. He doesn't tell you any other measurements. The 2 shoes of Adam Beinani. And here's the Mari Veil. He brings the Mari Veil. In his generation, that was how you measured an Amma. So Could be he measured an amma according to his generation. Could have been smaller than what we know today. Could have been smaller than the time of the Gemara also. But if the shear is amma berum shalosh amis, and that is what the Chachamim tell you how to measure a mikveh that should be kosher mid'oraisa, then by every generation it would be different. But today we anyways don't go based on all these what's the average height of a person to make a mikveh. We have the shiurim that are set up based on the way that Rebbe Rashab. That's much more than what covers even the biggest person today, and that's the shiurim that we use. The only time that we do consider the average height of a person is when building a boat. You have to make that the water level, the way the Alter Rebbe mentions. Let me just specifically say it 1 second. Find a specific lashon. Page Yudalad in Tikkun Mikvos in the red book. This is Tikkun Mikveh of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe wrote how to make the mikveh. One day we're going to get to also explain what it is. Just want to point out one nikud over here. The first few words. Noida v'sharim amtziyonim ba'alacha. Shegoiva hamayim b'mikveh tzorech liyos kechatzi amo m'ma'al tibura. The height of the mikveh where you're toiveling has to be a half an amma above the tibura, above the midpoint, the belly button. So now, this is where if you're going to make a mikveh, which is exactly we're in a tight place, and you're going to have to know what the average height of woman in that country is to be able to add a half an amma in mala tibura. You can't make it stam. The average height, based on that, you would know what it is. That's when it comes into play. Because over here, it's not a shiur that the Torah says of a by himself. It's a shiur of building the height of the mikveh that the person should be able to toivel with his body being able to not be no folds on the body, and that way it's not going to be the whole body goes into the water without a problem. So that is that share. Each place, you look each generation, each country. There might be differences a little bit. You don't have to calculate each. You have to start measuring before you build a mikveh in your town. Go and start measuring. But there's average height of women in countries, and you would know the fierech how to do it. Now, just you should know, anytime we measure amis and tfachim and everything else that's related to mikveh, not to the shear of water, we follow Reb Chaim Noah's shear of 2 centimeters for etzba, 8 centimeters for a tefach. The only place you go the bigger shear is when it comes to the water, rainwater. But when we're going to be discussing hamshocha gimel tfachim bekarka, or shefer sanoid, or tefach al tefach, hole in the bottom of the mikveh, all those measurements, or the height of 7 tefachim that you need to have the minimum height in certain situations, that also Alter Rebbe mentions about something else. All those tefachim, we don't follow the tefach the way you do the Rebbe Rashab's mikveh. We don't follow the amma based on the Rebbe Rashab's shear of 726 liters. That shear, the bigger shear. You follow based on the standard shear that we accepted, the Chaim Noah's shear of 2 centimeters. Okay, Slach everyone. Continue from where you're holding.